All these years, I thought the best thing I could do for my family was to be invisible. To stay in the background, not ask too many questions, and not disturb the rhythm of their lives. My children, my grandchildren, they were all busy with their own things. And well, I was at home, cooking meals, keeping the house in order, and waiting for the occasional phone call or visit. I told myself that this was my role, the quiet one, the reliable one. After all, isn't that what mothers and grandmothers do? Wait, love, and never ask for anything in return. But last year something changed. My son Michael called me one afternoon. He didn't sound rushed, as he usually did when juggling his busy life. This time he was calm, almost excited. "Mom, I've been thinking. We should all go on vacation. You deserve it. You've worked hard all these years. It's time for you to have some fun." Caught me off guard. A vacation. Me. The last time I'd gone anywhere was years ago, long before my husband passed. My world had become the kitchen, the couch, and the phone. I had convinced myself that was all I needed. But Michael's words stirred something inside me, a longing I hadn't realized was still there. "Where are we going?" I asked, almost whispering, as if the dream might shatter if I spoke too loudly. "Somewhere warm, Mom. Somewhere nice. We're getting everything sorted. I'll take care of it. Just pack your things." For the first time in a long while I smiled. I even felt a flutter in my chest, a spark of excitement I hadn't felt in years. For a brief moment, I allowed myself to believe that I was important enough for them to take time out of their lives to include me in something so special. Few weeks later, Michael called again. This time, his voice was filled with more certainty. "We've booked the tickets, Mom. It's happening. Just get ready, pick a nice dress. We're going to your favorite place. Trust me, it's all taken care of." I couldn't believe it. The trip was real. I imagined the warm sun on my face, the sound of the ocean, the laughter of my family surrounding me. I could picture it all in my mind. I went out and bought a new suitcase, the kind I'd seen in the store and thought was too extravagant. But this time I didn't hesitate. I even bought a new dress, something light and airy for the beach, and new sandals. I was ready. This was going to be the moment when I finally felt like part of the family again. But then, a day before we were supposed to leave, the call came. Michael's voice was tight, hurried. "Mom, I hate to do this, but the trip's getting pushed back. We've got to rework some things." "I'm sorry, I know you were looking forward to it." My heart sank. I forced a smile as I listened to him explain, but the words blurred together. "Things need to be reworked." Sounded so impersonal, like a problem to be solved, not a broken promise. I hung up the phone, trying not to let him hear the disappointment in my voice. But I still believed. I told myself it was just a small delay. They were busy, they had their reasons. After all, my family loved me. They would still make good on their promise. Days passed. I waited. I checked my phone constantly, waiting for a message, a call, anything. The calendar on the wall stared back at me, mocking me with its empty dates. It was the same routine: cooking, cleaning, waiting. And then one evening, as I prepared a nice dinner, I realized that no one was coming. No one had even called to explain. I ate alone that night, the food I had so carefully prepared sitting cold on the table. And so I waited. Not for the vacation, not for the family reunion that was promised, but for something I realized would never come. And then it hit me. They had all forgotten about me. And not just forgotten. They had decided that I no longer mattered enough to be included. I thought back to all the years of waiting. The birthdays I spent alone. The holidays where I pretended to be okay with being ignored. But this was different. I wasn't just waiting anymore. I wasn't just invisible. I was being erased. That night, as I sat at the table with the empty plates around me, I knew one thing for certain. I would never let them forget me again. The role they had assigned me, the one of the invisible grandmother, the one they could always rely on to be quiet and understanding, that was over. I would make them see me, even if it meant showing them just how much they had taken me for granted. And so the story begins. The night before my 75th birthday was the quietest of them all. I lay in bed, staring into the darkness, my mind replaying the promises my son had made to me. He said he would come. We would go together, it wouldn't just be a gift, but a real family trip. I think I even felt my heart beat a little faster when he told me those words. And then, that emptiness, like milk that had curdled at the bottom of a cup. The silence that poured in through the cracks in my old room seemed to confirm it all. Maybe I was too old now to expect anything, to hope for something that wasn't meant for people like me anymore. I turned onto my side, my thoughts tumbling in the dark. The bed was cold, even though the blanket lay across me like a heavy weight. I tried to ignore the sinking feeling in my chest, telling myself that I still had the next day to look forward to. Tomorrow was my birthday after all. It was supposed to be special. They'd promised me that much. But somewhere deep inside, I could hear the quiet whisper of doubt. How many times had I waited for something that never came? I glanced at the clock. Midnight. Soft sigh escaped me. I shifted under the covers, adjusting the pillow beneath my head, but sleep wouldn't come. The room was still. Too still. The world outside was asleep, and I was left alone with my thoughts. By morning, the sun hadn't quite risen, but the light creeping through the curtains reminded me that today was the day. My birthday. I sat up, took a deep breath, and despite the hesitation, got out of bed. I moved slowly, as though trying to convince myself that today would be different. I dressed in a light dress I had once worn to family holidays, the one that always made me feel a little bit special. It was old, yes, but it still fit and still looked nice. I paired it with the new shoes I'd bought for the trip. I'd never worn them before. They were meant for walking along beaches, stepping through golden sands, and catching the sunlight on my skin. I wasn't sure what to feel anymore. It was all too complicated, a blend of excitement and disappointment, hope and resignation. But I still tried to smile in the mirror, adjusting the hem of my dress. I was ready. Ready for them to show up. Ready for the family to be there. For the moment I had imagined for so long. I wasn't sure what I was waiting for, but I knew that I had to hold on to that fragile thread of hope just a little longer. I made my way to the kitchen and began preparing the meal. I set the table with the good china, the one that had gathered dust for too many years. I laid out the dishes, carefully chosen. My famous stuffed chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans. The smells filled the house. The table looked perfect. This was what I had done for years, creating the setting, the atmosphere, the feeling that everything was just as it should be. My fingers worked mechanically, but my mind was elsewhere, counting the hours, waiting for the knock at the door, the sound of familiar voices, the laughter that would fill the room. I looked at the clock again, 5 p.m. I stood by the window, pressing my forehead against the glass. My hands trembled as I held the curtain aside, watching the street for any sign of them. Would the car pull up to the driveway? Would they be running up the path, smiling and laughing? The minutes dragged on like hours, and the sky outside darkened slowly, casting shadows across the yard. I kept telling myself it would happen, it had to happen. But as 6 o'clock came and went, then 7 o'clock and finally 8 o'clock, I knew. Deep down I knew. No one was coming. I stood frozen, staring at the table, the candles flickering softly, casting a warm glow over the empty plates. My hands shook as I reached for the phone, hoping to see a message, a call, something. But nothing. The screen remained blank, just as it had been all day. By 9 o'clock, I couldn't keep pretending anymore. The hope, that fragile hope, broke apart like glass, each shard sharp and cutting. I sat down at the table, my hands folded in my lap, and I allowed myself to feel it. The truth. They weren't coming. They had promised, and they didn't come. And this time it wasn't just a delay. It was something else. It was absence, it was silence, it was forgetfulness. I didn't even try to deny it. The phone had been silent, and it had been too long now. Maybe they were caught up in something. Maybe they were just busy. But I couldn't help but feel the truth settling over me like a heavy cloak. I picked up my phone and called Michael once again. No answer. I tried again and again. My fingers pressed the buttons out of habit, but I already knew. There was no point in waiting anymore. They wouldn't answer. They never would. By 10 o'clock, the food had grown cold. The candles were fading one by one. I couldn't sit at the table anymore, staring at the empty plates. I got up and began to clear everything away, putting the dishes in the fridge, wiping down the table with a cloth. Everything was ready, but no one was coming. I was ready, but no one cared. I slowly removed the dress I had so carefully put on, folding it and placing it on the back of the chair. As I did, I told myself something I had known all along but had been too afraid to admit. You are still a mother, but you are no longer needed. For years I had prepared meals, hosted holidays, set the table, cleaned up afterward. I had done all of it with love and care, hoping that one day my family would recognize it, would appreciate it. But now I saw the truth. The role I had played, the one I thought was so important, had become irrelevant. I wasn't needed anymore. The emptiness that filled the room was not just in the vacant seats at the table but inside of me as well. A hollow feeling spread through me, like something had cracked open and drained all the warmth out of my body. I didn't cry. I didn't even feel anger. I felt nothing except the quiet, dull ache of being forgotten. The phone remained silent. The house was still. I wrote the card I had bought for myself, the one that said, "You're still glowing." I had bought it weeks ago, thinking it would be something nice to have on my birthday. But now it felt like a cruel joke. I placed the card on the table next to the pie, where no one would see it, and for the first time in a long while, I allowed myself to accept the truth. They weren't coming back. And maybe, just maybe, it was time to stop waiting. I turned off the light and sat on the bed, watching the pale moonlight filter in through the window. The world outside was quiet, but inside everything had changed. Tomorrow would come and I would face it alone, just like tonight. But this time it would be different. For the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for anyone. That morning, I woke up late, exhausted from the emptiness that had quietly settled in my soul the night before. I could not understand why it had come to me, this loneliness that felt as though it had always been there, only waiting for the right moment to make itself known. I no longer hoped for a call, a message, or any form of recognition that would somehow make me happy. I had resigned myself to the idea that life, as it had always been, would continue on its own path, without anyone really noticing. I lived as I always had, getting up, doing my chores, making meals, sitting at my small table, all in silence. But even as I moved through the motions of my day, my heart wasn't quite in it. Something was missing. And that missing piece wasn't just a physical absence. It was the love, the care, the attention I had once given so freely, and that had long ago disappeared from my life. I glanced at the empty suitcase by the door, still waiting to be filled, and suddenly, the emptiness I had been trying to ignore became overwhelming. The promise of a family trip that was never meant to be. The weight of those unfulfilled expectations pressed down on my chest. My hands moved involuntarily toward the small, unopened envelope on the table, the one I had tucked away the night before, unsure if I wanted to face it again. The letter was the one I had planned to send to my son on my 75th birthday. A letter that had started as a simple note of gratitude, but had somehow turned into a confession of all the pain I had carried in silence for so many years. I never sent it. There was something about the words I had written that made me hesitate. I didn't want to push him further away, but I also knew I could not carry this burden alone any longer. I took the envelope in my hands, my fingers trembling slightly. As I held it, I realized that this was not just a letter. It was the last piece of my heart that I had been willing to give to him. I didn't have the strength to keep pretending. The disappointment, the isolation, the neglect, it all poured out in that letter. I opened it carefully, almost as if I feared the words inside would hurt more than they already had. I read over the letter one more time before placing the pen in my hand. Dear Dilia, my hand is not as strong as it once was, but I am trying to tell you something that I have kept silent about for years. I have always supported you, helped when you needed me, and I never once asked for anything in return. But today I feel like I am no longer just your mother. I feel like I have become a shadow of the person I once was. You have been so busy with your life, so far removed from me, that I feel like I no longer matter to you. I have watched my role in your life diminish, And I have tried to convince myself that it's all right, that you have your own life, your own family. But deep down I know it isn't all right. I cannot hide this emptiness anymore. I am still your mother, Dilia. I will always be here. But there is something you need to know. I am not just a background figure in your life. I have feelings, I have a heart that still loves you. I don't want to be forgotten anymore. And I need you to know that. I set the pen down, my eyes welling with tears as I reread the words. I could feel the weight of them in my chest. It hurt to write them, but it also felt like something had been lifted. For the first time in years, I had said what was in my heart, even if I knew he would never read it. I sat quietly for a moment, looking at the letter. But as I stared at the words, something shifted in me. A quiet resolve started to build within. I could no longer be the silent, forgotten mother. I could no longer be the one who waited endlessly, giving without receiving, watching as my family moved on without me. With a deep breath, I picked up the envelope and put the letter back inside. I folded it carefully, placed it on the table, and for the first time, left it there without looking back. I didn't need to send it. I didn't need his approval or his acknowledgement anymore. I looked around the room. It was the same as always. The same walls, the same quiet, the same loneliness. But something inside me had changed. I wasn't going to sit here and wait any longer. I stood up, walked to the front door and opened it. The air was cool, fresh and full of promise. I stepped outside onto the porch, feeling the weight of the world lift slightly with every step I took. The house was quiet, but it didn't feel so oppressive anymore. It was just a house. And I was more than just the woman who had waited for her children to return. For the first time in years I made a decision. I wouldn't be a victim anymore. I wasn't going to sit inside, crying over what I didn't have. I was going to live. As I walked down the path and out into the yard, I felt a strength I hadn't realized was there. I wasn't waiting for anyone anymore. They could forget me, they could choose not to come. But I wasn't going to let that define me anymore. The next chapter of my life would be mine to write, and I would live it on my own terms. I no longer had the energy to dwell on the hurt. I had learned, after all, that life is not just about waiting for others to make you feel valued. It's about finding your own worth, even when no one else sees it. And as I looked up at the sky, feeling the weight of the world fall off my shoulders, I knew this was the moment when everything would change. No more waiting. No more hoping. No more being invisible. This time I would be the one who took control. And I was ready. That morning I stood by the window, watching as the rain slowly streamed down the glass, the streets slowly coming to life after the night. But I felt different. I could feel a change inside me, a shift that I knew was irreversible. There was no room for apologies, no space for promises or explanations anymore. I was ready to act, and this time I wasn't waiting for anyone's calls, their excuses or their forgiveness. I had made my choice, and it was final. 4 years I had lived with a silent hope that one day they would come back to me, that one day they would recognize all that I had done for them. But the truth was now undeniable. They had chosen to forget me, to take advantage of my love and patience without ever looking back. I had spent decades in the shadows, quietly serving their needs, but now I was stepping into the light. I wasn't just going to sit in silence anymore. The world around me had changed, and so had I. My hands didn't move as quickly as they once did, but they were steady enough for what I had to do. I opened the closet, took out an old travel bag, the one I used to carry with me when I went on trips. I had kept it for the memories it held, for the adventures it had been part of. But today it was no longer going to be empty. I opened it, my fingers brushing against its familiar, worn interior. I reached inside, grabbed the checkbook, and sat down at the table, ready to take control of my life for the first time in years. It wasn't like me to take such actions. I had always been the quiet one, the one who supported, the one who gave. But now I was taking everything into my own hands. I wasn't afraid anymore. This was the only way forward. The checks, the automatic payments, the bills that had been paid without my permission, all of it had to stop. My son's bills, the mortgage, the car payments they had put on my name, all of it had been a silent burden I had borne for years. I had kept silent because I thought that was what family did. But no more. I wasn't going to quietly fund their lives any longer. As I sat down and wrote the first cancellation, my heart beat faster. The action was simple, but the significance of it echoed deep inside me. Each signature felt like a small victory, a reclaiming of my autonomy. Each crossed-out payment was a step away from the years I had wasted, a step toward something new. I could feel the tremor in my hand as I signed the last one. The last payment would be the final thread tying me to the past. I felt as though I had released something heavy and oppressive, as if the weight of years of unspoken resentment and silent sacrifice had been lifted. My life, which had been controlled by their needs, their demands, was mine again. I took a deep breath, steadying myself, and picked up the phone. My heart raced, but I knew what I had to do. I was no longer afraid. There was no going back now. "Good afternoon," I said firmly into the receiver, my voice strong. "I would like to cancel all automatic payments from my account. And I would like to revoke access to my bank account for my son." The bank representative on the other end of the line was calm, professional, but there was a slight pause after my request. I knew they had probably never had a request quite like this before, but I didn't care. This was my decision, and I wasn't going to back down. "Understood, ma'am," she replied. "I'll start processing that for you now." As I listened to the soft clicking of keys, I felt a small sense of pride swelling inside me. For the first time in a long while, I was doing something for me. I wasn't waiting for anyone to validate me. I wasn't waiting for their approval or their understanding. I was doing it because I had to. Because if I didn't, I would continue to disappear. And I wasn't going to let that happen anymore. When the call ended, I felt a strange sense of freedom wash over me. I had crossed a line, but it was one I had needed to cross. I was no longer a passive figure in their lives. No longer the silent woman who waited, who gave, who hoped. I was taking back control, and I wasn't going to apologize for it. The phone rang shortly after. First it was my son. Then my daughter-in-law. I didn't answer. I didn't need to explain myself to them anymore. I had spent too many years justifying my actions, trying to make them understand. But the truth was they didn't care. They had only ever cared when it was convenient for them. So I ignored the calls, not out of spite, but because I no longer needed their validation. As the evening rolled in, I received a message from my son. It was short, cold, and to the point. "Mom, where are you? Why aren't you answering?" It was as if all the years I had spent giving and sacrificing for them had amounted to this. An indifferent message, a reminder that I had become an afterthought. I didn't need to reply. I didn't need to explain. I didn't owe him anything. Not anymore. I felt a bitter laugh bubble up inside me as I typed my response, my fingers steady as I pressed the keys. "Don't wait anymore. It's your turn now. Time to pay for your own freedom." When I sent the message, it felt like the final exhale, the last step in letting go. I was free from the guilt, from the years of being used. For the first time in years, I felt like I was in control of my own life. I turned off my phone after that. I had no intention of answering any more calls. They could wait. They could try to find me, but I wouldn't be the person I was anymore. I was done with the silence, the expectations, the disappointment. The evening stretched on, and I sat quietly, watching the shadows dance across the walls. The silence in the house felt different now. It was no longer a wait. It was a space for me to breathe, to think, to decide what I wanted next. The next morning, I woke up to another round of missed calls and messages. But I didn't feel the familiar tug of worry or guilt. I just felt a calmness, a quiet peace. I wasn't a victim anymore. I wasn't going to let them drag me back into that cycle. I had made my decision, and I was sticking to it. I had reclaimed my life, my freedom. And as I looked out the window, watching the world continue on, I knew one thing for certain. I was no longer waiting for them to choose me. I had chosen myself. And that, I realized, was the only choice that mattered. The next morning, I woke up to a profound silence around me. It wasn't the familiar silence of old age, that quiet stillness that settles in when no one visits, but you continue to wake up and live your days as you've always known. No, this was different. This was the silence after an explosion. A silence that followed the decision I had made to no longer be part of the void that had consumed me for so many years. I could feel it inside, a shift. Everything was different. There was no longer any space for worrying about others. No more waiting for their calls, their messages, their promises. I was done with all of that. I was done with being the one who waited. I had decided, and for the first time in a long while I was ready to act. The house around me felt empty in a way that didn't hurt anymore. It was just still, a quiet space where I could finally breathe. No one's expectations weighed me down. I felt a strange peace wash over me as I sat up, letting the morning light filter through the curtains. I had made my choice, and that choice was no longer about hoping, wishing, or waiting. It was about action, about taking back the life I had forgotten to live. I moved slowly, as my hands still weren't as quick as they once were. But today they had purpose. I walked to my closet and retrieved the old leather travel bag, the one that had accompanied me on so many adventures over the years. The one filled with memories of better times. Today it wouldn't be empty. Today I was going to fill it with something new. I opened the bag and reached inside to pull out the checkbook I had kept tucked away for so long. For the first time it felt like the right thing to do. The right step to take. For so many years I had spent my strength supporting others. I had paid their bills, funded their dreams, given them everything I could, with no expectation of anything in return. I had lived their lives, I had been their silent supporter. But now I was drawing a line. No more. Today was the day I reclaimed what was mine. I placed the checkbook on the table in front of me, my fingers trembling slightly as I prepared to take the first step in reclaiming my freedom. I had always been careful with money, always made sure the bills were paid, always kept everything in order. But today, I wasn't thinking about what was owed or what had to be done. Today I was thinking about what was mine, and what was no longer going to be theirs. I began with the bills, the automatic payments that had been draining my account without me even noticing. The payments for the car they didn't ask me about, the bills for the apartment they had moved into, the insurance they had added me to. All of it. They had used me not just for my resources but for my silence. I had given them everything without asking for anything in return. But now I wasn't just stopping the flow of money. I was stopping the cycle of being taken for granted. I picked up the phone, my heart pounding in my chest. It was time to cut the final thread. "Good afternoon," I said with more calm than I had felt in years, the words coming out steady, full of conviction. "I'd like to cancel all automatic payments from my account, and I want my son's access to my finances revoked." There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. "That's a serious request. Are you sure about this?" "I'm sure," I replied firmly. "And do you know what? This is when my real life begins." As I heard the person at the bank begin processing the request, something inside me clicked into place. This wasn't just about money. It wasn't about the numbers or the accounts or even the loss of financial support. This was about power. The power I had given away so freely for years was now mine to reclaim. And I wasn't going to waste it. The conversation ended, and I sat there for a moment, the weight of what I had just done sinking in. I had made the decision and I had acted on it. No more waiting. No more questioning. I had taken back control of my own life. The rest of the day was a blur. It was like I was moving in a dream, but everything felt so real. I walked to the bank, changed all my account details, and blocked every last bit of access they had to my finances. The paperwork was filed, the signatures made. The world outside my door might not have noticed, but I had made a change that would echo through my life from now on. I didn't expect a moment of victory. I didn't expect to feel proud or validated. This wasn't about recognition. It wasn't about proving anything to anyone. It was about me. It was about taking back my dignity, my freedom, my life. By the time I returned home, I felt an unfamiliar weightlessness. There was no cheering, no applause. There was just the quiet satisfaction of knowing that for once, I was the one who had decided. I wasn't sitting around waiting for something to change anymore. I wasn't expecting anything from them. I was done being the woman who was always there for others. Now I was the woman who was there for herself. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the documents I had just signed, at the letters I had written and never sent, at the photographs that filled the frames around me. These were the ghosts of my past, the memories I had long forgotten to cherish because I had been so busy giving. But today, I wasn't just reliving those memories. I was making new ones. I was crafting the first steps of a new life, one that didn't involve waiting or hoping or pleading. I felt stronger than I had in years. The decision I had made was not a rejection of my family, but a reclamation of myself. I had given them everything for too long, but I wasn't willing to give anymore. Now I was going to give to myself. I was going to live for me. As I sat there in the quiet house, looking at the sunlight spilling through the windows, I felt a calmness take over me. I didn't know what the future would hold. I didn't know if they would ever understand what I had done. But that didn't matter anymore. What mattered was that I had finally chosen. This was my life now, and I was going to live it the way I wanted to. When I sat in my old chair, the one that had always been the sole connection to my past, I began to feel how this step was changing everything around me. Every movement, every word, every breath felt new. I wasn't the helpless old woman anymore, waiting for attention or kindness from my family. No, I felt something stronger inside me, something that had been buried for so long, the strength to change my own life without anyone else's help. That morning, I woke up with a new sense of purpose, a quiet but firm resolve. I was done looking at old photographs, at things that reminded me of the days when I had tried so hard to please my children, hoping that at least one of them would return the favor for all the years of giving. No, this time everything would be different. I got out of bed with a new feeling. I was the full mistress of my life now, and it was my decision, my future. For so long I had spent my days living for others, thinking that if I did enough, loved enough, waited enough, something would change. But as I stood there that morning, looking around at the quiet, empty room, I realized I had been living in someone else's life. And now it was my time to start living for me. My first decision was to find a new purpose. I wasn't going to sit in an empty room waiting for change to come to me anymore. I realized I wouldn't be a background character in someone else's story anymore. If my children wanted to get rid of me, I would give them the chance to see what it truly felt like to be abandoned. But this time, I wasn't going to be a victim. I would take charge of my own story, and I would do it on my own terms. I wasn't sure how it would feel, but I knew what I had to do. I went to my closet and pulled out the old computer I had been neglecting for so long. It was slow, yes, but it worked. And I wasn't afraid anymore. I wasn't afraid of the technology, of making a mistake, or of taking the leap into something new. My hands no longer trembled with doubt. They were steady now, purposeful. I opened the computer and started searching. I searched for houses, for places to live. I didn't need to consult anyone. I didn't need anyone's opinion. I wanted a place that felt like mine, a place where I could be free. A small house by the lake caught my eye. Quiet, peaceful, a place where I could just be. I had never dared to take that step before, always thinking it was impossible, always waiting for the right time or for someone else's approval. But now the right time had come. I called a real estate agent, and within hours, I was arranging the details for the house. The whole process felt surreal, like a dream I had long tucked away in my heart, but one that was finally becoming a reality. I was no longer waiting for anyone to make decisions for me. I was the one making decisions now. The house was mine, or it would be soon. I didn't care if anyone else understood it. I didn't care if they judged me or thought I was being reckless. I was doing this for me because I deserved it. As I sat at the table, holding the documents in my hands, I felt a sense of power I had never known before. The papers in my hands weren't just contracts. They were my declaration of independence. I wasn't going to be someone's afterthought anymore. I wasn't going to be the one who gave and gave and gave without ever receiving. I had taken control, and that felt like freedom. That day I wrote another letter. Not to my son, not to anyone else, but to myself. A letter I never thought I would write, but one that became the most important message I had ever received. I don't need anyone's promises anymore, and I'm not waiting anymore. Now I am writing my own story. This was my decision, and I have no regrets. That letter was more than just words. It was a promise to myself. A promise that I would never again wait for someone to choose me, to need me, to validate me. I was enough. I had always been enough. And now I was going to live my life on my own terms, with no one to hold me back. It was a step toward a new reality. I was no longer a shadow in their lives. I was the author of my own story, and this chapter was going to be different from any I had written before. I wasn't going to sit in the quiet of the past anymore. I was going to make new noise, new memories, new dreams. I was going to create a future that was mine. The road ahead wasn't easy, and I knew there would be moments when I questioned my decision. But that day, in the quiet of my room, I finally felt what it was like to be in control of my own destiny. I wasn't looking for approval anymore. I didn't care about their opinions. I cared about my own happiness, my own peace, my own freedom. And for the first time in years, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: hope. A hope that was no longer about waiting for someone else to change my life, but about believing that I had the power to do it myself. And that, in itself, was enough. As I sat there, looking out the window at the world outside, I knew that this was just the beginning. There was so much more ahead. And this time I was ready to meet it, head-on, with strength, with courage, and with the knowledge that I was no longer waiting for anyone else. This was my time. I woke up that morning with a profound sense of freedom. The sunlight filtering through the curtains felt different, warm, peaceful. It was the first morning after I had finally let go of my past. The past that had kept me tangled in obligations, sacrifices, and promises. Now I was alone, and it didn't scare me. In fact, it brought a deep sense of inner calm. After signing the papers for the new house, I felt something release inside me. It wasn't just about the house or the money. It was about letting go of them, my family, my children, who no longer had any influence over my life. For the first time I could say out loud, "I am no longer yours. And this is my decision." The whole day was spent sorting through my things. I started packing old photographs, books I had once read, even the paintings that had hung on the walls. But now it didn't feel like saying goodbye. It felt more like cleansing. I carefully placed each item, each memory, as I cleaned my past from anything that might remind me of the tears I no longer wanted to wipe away. And then, as I stopped thinking about their reactions, about how they might respond when they found out I had gone, when I stopped being afraid of their indifference, I realized I wasn't just leaving this house. I was leaving the past behind. And all that remained was the future, a future in which I could finally make decisions for myself. By evening I was ready. My new home was chosen, the papers were signed, and I had taken everything I truly needed. Maybe I would never see the old walls of this house again, but now I wasn't afraid of change. They no longer had the power to hold me back. I wasn't waiting for a phone call, and I wasn't hoping for their return. I was beginning a new chapter, free from limitations and free from tears. The next day, as I set off for my new house, I felt the city slowly fading behind me. With every step forward, with each mile I covered on my way to this new reality, I felt lighter. My soul felt as free as a bird, finally able to fly. And that was the true moment of liberation. The road wasn't fast, but I didn't rush. With each passing moment, I understood more clearly that even if this path ahead was difficult and unknown, I no longer feared it. I was no longer the one seeking forgiveness, the one living in the expectations of others. I was me, and this time I was creating my own life. In this new home, amid new possibilities, I felt, for the first time in a long time, truly alive. I wasn't waiting for a call from my son anymore. I wasn't waiting for apologies that would never come. I no longer believed that my worth was defined by others. They left me, but it wasn't me who had been abandoned. I had chosen this. And this was my choice. I opened the door to my new home, and the first step I took over its threshold wasn't just a step into a new house. It was a step into a new life. I no longer depended on anyone. Now I would decide when and how to live. And that was the best decision of my life. As I looked around the new space, a quiet smile spread across my face. It wasn't a place filled with memories of the past, with shadows of people who had once been a part of my life. It was a place where I could finally write my own story. It was a space to breathe, to dream, and to live for me, no one else. For the first time in decades, I felt truly free. The journey I had embarked on wasn't just about leaving behind a house or a family. It was about reclaiming myself, my independence, and my worth. And as I stood in the doorway, looking out into the horizon, I knew this was only the beginning. I was no longer a shadow in anyone's life. I was the light, and I was going to shine unapologetically in my own way.